I'm Jonathan Drori, this is Dominic Tinley. I think we've been asked here because we did a report for the Board of the Arts Council of England about digital technology and how arts organisations might use digital technologies better in both in their marketing and content operations, and that you'll find that report on the Arts Council website. My own background is, I came from the BBC originally. I used to run BBC Online there. I was the editorial director for BBC Online, and since then I've ended up in various sort of digital activities. I'm on the board of the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, which has a substantial marketing and outreach operation, though it's not a DCMS sort of body. And I'm a member of the Internet Watch Foundation board as well as some other boards. Dominic, do you want to?
Yes, so I'm also director of Thoughtsmith and work as a digital media consultant. I've been developing online media projects for about 20 years now. I worked out the other day. I've just got a scary thought, I must be getting old. I started off working at the BBC, which is when I first met Jonathan, developing educational online projects, and I've been working in the arts and cultural sector off and on for the last 20 years. Right.
Good.
There we go.
So, what we're intending to do today is not to be give you an exhaustive list, it might be exhausting at the end of the day, but exhaustive list of the things that arts organisations need to get right. But we're going to concentrate on 12 things that we've come across with a lot of arts organisations that they tend to get wrong. So this isn't all the things that you have to do to get right. You'll see lots of gaps and so on, but these are the ones that we most commonly see as things that people fail to do.
So the first one of these, why competing with cats? The biggest challenge we think that arts organisations that we would work with face is not the competition with each other for time. It's not the competition with each other, but it's the competition for people's time. Digital content is changing, and over the last few years it's gone from being something where you're promoting an offline activity, promoting physical activities or promoting old media, to becoming a means of delivering content, to now becoming digital first projects and projects that blend digital and physical activity together. So the boundaries between marketing and digital are increasingly blurred. But I think the big mistake used to be in the past that people used to say, if you build this, people will come to it. And it was the case that people didn't put enough money into marketing at all. That seems to have shifted the other way with sites like BuzzFeed. 31 cats you won't believe actually exist. It's just purely about that little moment. Can you capture people for that one moment? So the focus is no longer about the content, it's all about that little marketing moment. And this is where we think arts and cultural organisations, you have something which BuzzFeed can never have, and that is that you've got the currency of emotion. You can actually do that content that people won't really believe. You can do that content that people will really be amazed by. So in this talk, when we talk about digital, we're not talking about marketing specifically, we're not talking about content specifically, we're talking about the whole package. Because where it works, those things are wrapped up together. So the first point is, how do I turn that on? Thanks. Is using your content, and that's something that as arts organisations you can do, which organisations like BuzzFeed could never do. The second point is about articulating your aims. And so this is not just being clear about your aims, but being able to clearly tell people what your aims are. And those could be, how do I turn this on, John? Oh, I've got it. What the overall aims of a particular piece of digital activity is that you're doing, and what the overall aims of your organisation are. So they could be things like acclaim, or critical acclaim for something you're doing, or reach, building a community, or possibly making a profit. And ideally these would be wrapped up into a clear strategy for the organisation and a clear digital strategy that explains exactly what you're trying to do. If you can't have a clear digital strategy, you should at least have a clear direction of travel, so that you can, so that everyone in the organisation knows which way you're going. Beyond that, then, it's important to have really clear criteria, to boil those down into a set of criteria that you can use when you're assessing what kind of activity you should do. You hear a lot of people saying, oh, we really want to make an app, but they don't know why they're doing it or who they're doing it for. So being clear who a project is for and why you're doing it, which boxes it's ticking, and then from that having a balance of projects that meet all your aims overall. So if you're doing a project, perhaps you want to push boundaries with new technology or you want to reach a new audience, you want to make sure that your projects as a whole tick all your criteria, but no single project should be trying to do every single thing new, because if you try and do everything new, you're unlikely to succeed.
And these things actually seem kind of terribly obvious, but in our in our dealings with a lot of the organisations actually represented here, we found that these aims aren't necessarily well understood and shared by everyone, and particularly not sometimes by the boards. So you often get a disjoint between the people who are in the marketing department and the people on the board who might think rather differently about what the actual aim is. And we'll come to that a bit more later. For us at the moment today, it's we realise that there are some people here who are responsible for sort of larger departments and so on, and some people who are at the sharp end of actually trying to implement the strategy. And so there's the general and there's the specific, and we hope we manage to cover a bit of both. One of the things that people often get wrong is measuring the wrong things and thinking that they're important. I worked for a large organisation for a while where my salary that I carefully negotiated was intimately linked with the growth of internet traffic for that company over and above the growth of the internet as a whole at the time. And the way they measured it was page views. So you can immediately think, what would you do in my position if you're in charge? You make all the pages a bit smaller, don't you? And of course, the organisation gave themselves a great big tick and said, oh, we're doing well, that's fantastic, look at the page views, they're rocketing ahead of the growth of the internet. It's a bit crap, really, isn't it? Because it wasn't really giving the customers anything better, and it wasn't increasing income, and it wasn't, so there's quite a lot of measuring the wrong things that go on. Which leads me to what I think of as the Westminster Bridge problem. I think of it as the Westminster Bridge problem because I tried once to get a project off the ground for one organisation, which was basically imagine you're standing on Westminster Bridge, and imagine that you're a tourist and you want to find out about all the things that are nearby, the museums, the galleries, the Houses of Parliament, the opening times, the disability access, how much it costs, all that kind of thing. But you go to each of those organisations and you ask for that data, and they're falling over to give it to you. It's absolutely fine, because they're going to get more people coming through their doors. It's great, everyone's happy. But then you say, well, wouldn't it be great to have some sort of app there where a tourist, they could pay for this app. Could listen to Ian McKellen reciting lines written on Westminster Bridge, could see some of the paintings inside the Houses of Parliament, which are in the public collection, or at the Tate, there's sort of pictures of clouds from Westminster Bridge, or all the other places that are around, just a little taster of what they might get from those institutions. Now, we're not talking about in-copyright material here, we're talking about stuff that's out of copyright. So you don't even have to go and negotiate with a load of artists. Wordsworth has been dead for a long time. So imagine trying to do that. Really, really hard. Now, it's not hard technically, not that hard technically, but it's very, very difficult to get all those institutions, dare I say, all your institutions, to collaborate and cooperate and say, yeah, we'll kind of make that happen. The first thing they say is, where's our branding? Then they say, where's the revenue stream, and how's exactly that going to work? Before you've even sort of got any kind of straw man of how this might work, there's a real sort of, we're competing with these other organisations. Our branding has to be above so-and-so's branding. If it's the V&A and the Natural History Museum, how the hell are we going to sort out the branding on that? which is not great for the public, right? But there is a real Westminster Bridge problem out there, and it stands in the way. And the thing that lies underneath it is how you measure success, right? Because if your measure of success is how many people get to see your stuff and enjoy it, then you'll do something very different from if your measure of success is how much credit you get with politicians or how much credit you get with the public, right? Because you're all be driven by branding and so on. So there's often it's much easier actually for commercial organisations to deal with this stuff than public sector organisations, because public sector organisations have a very complicated way of measuring success. Is it me still? Right. The human beings don't change very much. Technology changes quite rapidly. And we notice that quite a lot of organisations don't necessarily take into account the key drivers for human behaviour. And some of the ones that they miss, this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but some of the things they miss are, the wish to participate, the wish to actually be part of something and not necessarily standing on the sidelines. The overwhelming desire to communicate that people have, even if you're in a quiet carriage on a train and it says do not use your mobile phone, what do? You're on it. It's absolutely compelling for people to communicate with others. People want to be individuals but part of a tribe. Very, very important that they identify. They want choice but not overwhelming choice, not unlimited choice. They want to be told stories. Right? So they want that narrative, and they want actions to their. Sorry, they want reaction to their actions. So if you do something, if you click on something, or if you send a comment to an organisation, or you take an action, you want something to happen back, and it's something that people often forget. And then the idea of sort of chess players or people who do pottery making will understand this, or quilting, that you can immerse yourself in something and forget what's going on in the world. That's psychologists often call flow. And great theatre productions, great music productions, the audience will be in a state of flow. Can you create that in your marketing as well?
So a fourth point, which Nigel touched on earlier, is the importance of and also Jake mentioned it earlier, is the importance of not trying to build some monolithic system that will solve every single problem, because those systems never work. From 2005 to 2008, I was head of online for the Houses of Parliament, and when I started there, they'd already spent several £million on the Vignette content management system, and they were about to spend several million more. And the first thing I was persuaded them to do was to scrap that project, because it was just a complete waste of money. It wasn't going to deliver what it needed to deliver. The best digital projects are built up piece by piece, small interlocking components which eventually create the whole that you're trying to create, which is the point that Nigel made earlier. What's important as well is that it's then very easy to rip off this head and stick another head on, or take off a leg and put another leg on. If you have built it in that way, it's easier to take it apart. If you try to buy one thing that costs £1 million and solve your problem, you're going to find it extremely hard to take things out and swap them over. And this is particularly important for small arts organisations where your resources are likely to be very limited. So it's all about building for capability and building for reuse. You don't have to do this perfectly every time, but it's important to ask that question. It should be one of the key criteria in that list of criteria we mentioned earlier. One of the criteria should be, does this build future capability? Does this build our knowledge? Does this build infrastructure that we can use in other projects? So, for example, one arts organisation we work with, we're looking at adding building a piece of software that would allow tweets to appear on stage for a particular performance they were doing. Now, with a small tweak, that piece of software could be used to display tweets around the auditorium, or to add tweets onto the website. So it's looking at what those small changes can be, so that a project, you might be able to take that one little piece out there and use it for something different. So then it's really important how you go about leading your projects. Will you get the thing you want on time and on budget? And what's really important is not to confuse project management with editorial leadership. So the Millennium Dome, a very famous example of a project which took a long time to actually have any kind of purpose. Jack Chirac famously asked what it was for when he was shown a model of it. He said, "Oh, it looks very nice, but what is it for?" Excuse my French accent. So it took, it was about 10 years later that they finally worked out it. So in some organisations, people will say, "Oh, well, who should be leading this project? Should it be a project manager? Should it be a producer? Should it be the head of marketing?" It doesn't really matter what the job role is, but there should be someone in the centre who is able to facilitate the conversations with all the key people. And in this case, we're talking about the marketing people, the technologists, the creative people, and ideally people there who understand and can represent the audience directly.
Can I just add to that?
Yes, please do.
This is a point where the world of IT, information technology, and the world of media do things in rather different ways. And in the sort of online and digital online world, you see both sort of clashing sometimes. So in the IT world, you often have people who represent users who are brought in as part of the sort of process of iterating whether the product is any good or not. And they make comments, and then someone sort of takes that into account, hopefully, and then kind of decides how to proceed. In the media world and in the theatre world, for example, you have a director or an executive producer who would just say, "Do you know what, that's a bit crap, let's not do that, let's do this instead." Right? Now, they might go and do focus groups here and there, but someone is taking responsibility and is paid to have responsibility on behalf of the customer, the audience, and so on, which is quite a different process from the IT process. And I think what we're saying is just make sure that there's someone who actually is able to say, "Do you know what, this isn't so good, that would be better, let's do this." And you need to identify who that's going to be at the beginning of the project.
And also someone who can mediate that conversation and say, "Well, hang on a minute, noisy director, can you just hold that thought a minute, because I think the timid IT person in the corner is trying to say something, and I think it might be very important, so let's give them a chance to get their message across." One really good way to get everyone focused on the same thing is to create storyboards, which I'm sure, as most of you marketing people, you all know about this, but it's worth reiterating. This is a storyboard for a Culture Online project. John and I both at DCMS Culture Online years ago. Storyboards don't have to be as well designed as this, but having something that everyone can focus around and look at and say, "I'm not sure about that bit there, I don't really understand this bit." If anything, in fact, having a really sketchy drawing, the sketchier the better, people are able to criticise it and able to visualise it in a way that just explaining it to them doesn't always work. Recently I've been mentoring marketing people for the Arts Marketing Association's Digital Marketing Academy, and we're using storyboards there as a way of quickly prototyping ideas, because you can sketch something out and then just take it out into the foyer of your organisation. So, do you mind just having a look at this? I just want to talk you through it, see what you think. You get really quick feedback, very cheap, very quick. Builds on a point made earlier about making sure that the technologists' voices are heard. A lot of organisations we've worked with just won't bring in the IT person or the developer, the software engineer until it's a bit too late. And it's really important that that technical viewpoint is fed early into the conversation, because there may be products out there that already do what you're trying to do, or it may be that taking a subtly different approach would mean building it in half the time. So really important in this situation to have someone who can mediate the conversation.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to get this point across about technology. What happens in I think probably most organisations, is that a group of intelligent experts, people who know about audience and people who know about the arts, get together. There might be some facilitation, there might be some people from outside to think about what they want to offer in terms of a service or what would be right for the audience and so on. And then they go to the good ones, but not the best. We'll go to technologists and say, what do you think of this? How might this be better? How might it be different? How do we make this happen? And then they go on and ideally build it. But the best organisations would involve the technologists in that first conversation. And what you get out of that is just quite different. It's a bit like me saying, I'm going to sort of open a restaurant or something. And I'm going to have all these different sorts of things on the menu, and not involving someone who's ever cooked at the beginning of it. I actually do cook a bit, but do you see what I mean? It's just you'll get a different output, and so having technologists around who you are able to talk to, but can actually be there at the very initial idea stage, will just give you something quantitatively different. So having involved those people, don't stick them in a room at the other end of another building, right? You need to not compartmentalize technology. This is much easier in small organisations than in big ones. So in big ones, there's often a technology department, and they're off somewhere else, and people feel worried about entering, which is, again, no way to regard people as the sort of oily rag in the other building. Is it me or you?
Yeah.
It's me. So the breast pump problem. Can we talk about the breast pump problem? My neighbours down the street, lovely new baby, everyone happy. We go there for the sort of meet the baby kind of moment, and the mother needs to express milk. There's some contraption which is to do with breast pumps and things which I don't fully understand, but that's the point. And she said, could someone just knit to boots and get me the blah, blah, blah. I don't know what it was, but there's some bit of a breast pump that she needed. Who did she ask to do that? Did she ask me? No. Did she ask another bloke? No. Did she ask someone a woman who's not had a child? No. Did she say, you miss, you've had a baby before, can you please go and get me this bit from Boots? It sounds so obvious, doesn't it? But look at the NHS computer system. Oh God, you've been recorded. Sorry, look at the large computer systems around government, and look at the expertise of the people who are procuring those. Have they ever built a computer system before? I wonder. Have they ever used one in their house before in a really large scale? Doubt it. Have they been in organisations, where Nigel is, for example, at HRP, where you manage lots and lots of technology? Are those people procuring it? No, right? It's mad, isn't it? Don't you want someone who's actually got some expertise in the subject to procure the thing you're buying? If you're going to the shop to get some food for supper, you send something. If you haven't got the exact thing that you know that you want and the brand and the size and all that, you're going to send someone who's cooked before. Isn't it obvious? So when you're procuring technology or technical systems of any kind, make sure that the people who are doing the procuring, that's the people who are going to sign, the people who are kind of deciding what's going to be signed for, all of that, make sure they actually understand what it is they're procuring. I assure you that half your organisations probably don't do this. Still me.
It's still you, apparently.
Yeah. I should be looking at the description. Sorry, you're probably in the other half of the organisation. Look, when people are trying to do collaborations, they generally want one of these things, at least one of these. So they either want to reach more people or different people, or they want to increase their reputation. Credit and limelight are very important for arts organisations, or they want revenue, they want money. And if you go into a partnership where everyone wants the same thing, so if you're the BBC and you're the British Museum, right, you're both funded through the same routes, through the DCMS effectively, or setting charter for money, for license fee, then you're both going to be going hell for leather for reputation. The revenue bit probably isn't that important, and the number of people you reach might be quite important. So you're both going for reputation and reach, which means that when the BBC and the British Museum did the deal on 100 objects, I can't remember, it's got 100 great objects of history. Can you imagine how long that took to negotiate? It was just terribly difficult, right? Very, very difficult, because they're both wanting the same thing. When Kew Gardens, which I'm on the board of Kew, does a deal with the BBC, we're funded by DEFRA, right, which is the Department for Food and Rural Affairs. We're not in competition with the BBC because we have gardens, and we're a science organisation. We have 250 scientists. The BBC don't have any scientists, right? We're a completely different organisation. So we want reputation in completely different places. And actually, we want a bit of revenue, and the BBC won't worry about it. We want reach in different places. So actually, it's a marriage made in heaven. You can do the deal on the back of a fag packet. It's easy. So when you're doing deals with people, it sort of works for marriages in a way as well. But anyway, when you're doing deals with people, you just want to make sure that you're not tripping over each other in terms of what you both want. And of course, what people say they want is not necessarily what they actually want, right? They might be quite different, because obviously, none of the organisations that I've mentioned would sort of admit to any of that. So that's sort of read them a bit. So the other question for arts organisations particularly is, if you're in the business of reputation and reach, you're going to fall over yourselves deciding who leads the project in a collaboration. So I guarantee you, if you have been in collaborative projects with other organisations, you have a great sort of shouting match either internally or with each other about who's going to lead it, who's going to be seen to lead it, what the branding is, and all of that. And it puts a lot of friction in running the business.
So experimentation. Claire mentioned this in the very first presentation this morning about always carving out a certain amount of the budget for doing experimental things. But having done that, having said we are going to spend, I think it was 20% on experimental things that are very likely to succeed, 10% on experimental things that are less likely to succeed, but we'll give them a go. We'll try something new. It's really important you experiment well. So it's important what you have a research question in mind with all the experiments you do. What are you actually trying to find out? That's really important for avoiding scope creep. So at the moment I'm working with the BBC Connected Studio programme, and they run a piloting platform called Taster, where they put new experiences online for the audience. Every one of those experiences has a really clearly defined experimental statement, a research question. Why are we doing this? What are we wanting to test? It's really good for making sure that what you deliver it actually tests that thing and doesn't just become the whim of a commissioning editor to expand it in a new direction. So with any pilot, you want to be testing whether the thing you're building is replicable, whether it's scalable, whether it's sustainable. Some of these things you don't need to build to be able to test. Others, it's really important that you do. So, for example, I've also been working with the British Library recently on the National Radio Archive, which they wanted to learn, scoping that out. Technically, we kind of know that a lot of these things are possible, but from a sustainability point of view, it's really hard to know whether the radio industry will buy into it, whether users will be able to find what they're looking for. So by looking at these questions, you can make sure that you test the right thing. Experimenting also means bringing in other people's ideas. So by using application programming interfaces, APIs, you can make your data available to others. And by inviting people from outside to come into your organisation, then you can harness those ideas. Anything to add?
That's good. I would say one thing about these factors, that this is one place where the commercial sector and the public sector approach piloting in a quite different way. And obviously this is a broad generalisation. But if you go to car companies, they don't just want an innovation. They want to make sure that all these things are going to happen, right? That they can make this new way of doing something. It's sort of industrial. They can do it in lots of places, and that they can scale it around the country or around the world, or to their own factories or what have you. Similarly, if you're developing an arts format, of whatever genre, then you might be looking at some of these things. Are you so dependent on a particular style or talent that you can't replicate it, or all these things. In the public sector, because of the way that the public sector kind of works with its funding and ministers coming in and out every few years, and the way that trustee boards work, there's a sort of extra imperative to do things which are novel and innovative, and to demonstrate those over and above the bit that follows, which is making those wonderful, innovative things scalable, replicable, and sustainable. Right, so it's just sort of a way that the public sector tends to operate, is that, and you see it a lot in academic work as well. That there's more store put by something that is new than by something that is new and scalable, replicable, sustainable. And actually, you need all of those. So one of the things that this is sort of on juxtaposition of words there, isn't it, really? But if you think about a virus, and you're imagining flu and it's spreading around the country, which is kind of what you're trying to do with ideas, I guess, or you're trying to spread them as fast as possible from people to people. You want to make sure that each of your little viral memes, each of your ideas, each of your messages gets spread to the maximum number of contacts, and you want to make sure that it's very easy for those ideas to be transferred by someone to other people. So you want to make sure that they have a sort of, if it's your board, your masters, you want to make sure that they have a toolkit of ideas, of phrases that they can easily use and pass on to people. If it's the public, you want to make sure that it's very easy for them to pass something on, which is of course what Facebook and all the others do. And critically, you want to lower the incubation period. You want to reduce the amount of time that it takes for someone to pass on your message. And if you think of it in, think of the things that you're trying to do to persuade people, either in your organisation or outside the organisation, it's sometimes quite useful to sort of think of it in that way. All right? How many contacts can they get to? How easy is it for them to pass on, and how can you reduce the amount of time that it takes to go from one to the next? The other thing that we often see missing is digital expertise. Lacking, I think that's out of copyright, lacking on the board. So that at the board level, either at trustees, or it's usually among the trustees that this is missing, because trustees tend to be older. But it's also sometimes at the senior management team level, you don't get the sort of integrated technology knowledge of people who have sort of practical, technical ability. And what that means is that the board becomes more risk averse, because they sort of feel, do you know what, we don't quite understand this, so there isn't anyone on our board that we can look to say, does that feel all right, in the way that you would with an accountant or a financial person who would be on every board. And that means that people are automatically going, well, I'm a bit worried about this. Whereas if they had someone there who could say, do you know what, I think that's a crap idea, or that's actually quite good, I think that's all right, the other people would trust them. And so one of the things that, if you're hitting barriers in your organisation about people not wanting to sort of try things out and so on, one of the things you might lobby for is for them to get extra expertise on the trustee board, and you find that it percolates down quite quickly. And then I'm not sure how appropriate this is for this audience, but I'll just make the point that all those people, policymakers, governors, trustees, the executives, and so on, and yourselves probably need all these things. You need some sort of training. You need to learn peer-to-peer. They need to learn peer-to-peer, which means organising lunches for the greater good with people who understand technology or marketing or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And they absolutely need safe places to be able to ask dumb questions, right? So we all do. But the sort of, the higher you are up in the sort of hierarchy of things, the harder it is actually to ask dumb questions. Till you get to the point you're a minister, and there's almost no way you can ask a dumb question without the press leaping down your throat, right? So you need to give, whether it's ministers or trustees or senior executives, the space to be able to ask stupid questions, and they'll welcome it. So would you like a demo of such and such? Could we just sort of, just a kind of one-to-one thing where it's not all full of people taking notes, is a lot easier. Lunches, that sort of stuff.
So most of you, I remember from sticking up your hands this morning, marketing people, you know about data, you know about understanding audience data. Many of the organisations we've worked with, though, even though they're all experts too, we see a lot of experts getting it wrong and focusing on big data, getting all this data that we can analyse and missing possibly the key nugget of information which is kind of glaring and shouting out. So it's all about using the data that you have and using small amounts of data wisely rather than focusing on the kind of I'm allowed to say data wank. Making sure that the data that you do collect, you act on, that you're using it wisely. Now, we have also noticed that commercial organisations tend to do this more. They will tend to involve their marketing people, their data analysts, in their creative discussions when they're working out what kind of event or show or what kind of thing they're going to build next. And that's definitely something which it's important to kind of use the data that you have in planning what you're going to do.
I should say that there's an intrinsic problem for an arts organisation here, because there are some kinds of business, if you're selling burgers, it's sort of absolutely clear what success looks like, I guess. If you're in the arts world, you need both to get audiences and satisfy them, which means that you need to do market research on what they like and so on, but you're also leading. The thing about the arts is that you're creating something new, possibly, rather than just buying in something that's been had before. You might do both, and where you're leading and where you have a sort of artistic vision somewhere and a leadership necessarily means that you can't do everything on the basis of market research. I mean, you can use the market research to inform, but there is a discrepancy there, which organisations have to deal with. Oh, it's me. Have a look at this picture if you can see it. I'll describe it for the people at the back. This looks like an ordinary gallery opening, right? And it is in some ways York Art Gallery. The thing that's rather odd about it is that round the very edge of the room there is some blackboard paint. And here are the pictures that have been curated from their collection, and people, including this lady here, have been writing things up, and every now and then they get wiped off, and some more stuff gets put up. Some of them are quite fun. Someone has put to this portrait, "How am I going to tell my wife?" ? And then someone else has added, "She probably already knows about Stephen." And then in other handwriting, "and Michael." It's sweet, isn't it? Now, can you imagine the sort of conversations that went on in your art gallery when someone suggested that you're going to put blackboard paint around with their paintings, and you're going to have the public writing stuff up? I mean, just think about some of the reasons why you would not do this, right? It doesn't take very long, does it? The way they offset the risk was by getting an external curator, so they could say, if it doesn't work, we'll blame her, and if it does work, we'll take the credit together. And as it was, it worked very nicely. But the security guards, what's their role in this? Will there be damage to the painting? All this stuff. But actually, the biggest leap for them The biggest leap was saying we are going to interact with our audience. Now, I chose this as an example because blackboard paint and chalk is about as untech as you can get. So this really isn't necessarily about technology. It's about an attitude. And York Art Gallery went on to do, after this, all sorts of interesting things with technology that happens. But they needed to go through this as a first step. And quite a lot of arts organisations, I think, are at that stage of not really embracing the public as participants. It's not always the right thing to do, obviously, but for them, they needed to go through this. So we did some research from the DCMS about the organisations that are highly regarded, that people think these organisations are doing really well in the digital domain. This wasn't just about marketing, though it did include marketing. And there are certain things, obviously, that just good organisations have in common anyway. But we looked at the things that were specific to the organisations that were highly regarded in terms of digital operation. And we came across, I can't remember how many we've got here, 6 or 7, sorts of things that they were good at. First of all, they had ambition. That they had ambition for technology and the way that technology would allow them to do something. Right? So that was something that was shared throughout the organisation, so people understood it. Second thing was that they were technophile. They had an attitude towards technology which was more American than British. I'm sorry to say it. There's a sort of slightly sneering attitude towards technology that comes from our civil service, I believe. On camera, bloody hell. Is something that you don't get in either East or West Coast USA. I'm not talking about an entrepreneurial money-making thing. It's not about commerciality, but it is about an attitude towards technology and technologists. You just wouldn't find someone, in Boston talking about the sort of the engineer thinking, someone who's going to mend the kettle. You wouldn't find someone in Germany, sort of thinking about the oily rag kind of concept, right? It's a very British thing, and actually more English than Scottish, I have to say. Unsiloed, it sort of says unsoiled if you read it quickly, but the best organisations were able to put together interdisciplinary teams. Very easy to say, very difficult to do, because internet-y things bust the boundaries between things. So, but the best organisations were the ones that were able to bust out of those silos, at least temporarily.
So they're also bringing people in, bringing audiences in to test technology, ideally having access to audiences to be able to say, find out what it is that they want. We've come a long way from the days when public sector organisations simply put up on their website the structure of things as it was internally. Gov.uk website is fantastic, and a lot of public sector sites are sort of are much more geared towards users than they used to be. But as Jake pointed out in his presentation earlier, how difficult it is to actually complete a user registration. That's not thinking about things from an audience point of view, that's thinking about things purely from the organisational point of view. So to put yourself in the audience's shoes, ideally have the audience, someone from the audience there to talk to and say, what do you think of this? But if not, to at least have a proxy, have someone who represents them, a producer or someone with marketing insight into that audience who can say, that's really not going to work from that person's point of view. Data file, we talked about this earlier, knowing what to do with data, having people who understand the data in the decision-making meetings where new creative concepts being explored possibly. Being experimental, we've kind of largely covered that one. Carving out a certain amount of time for experimentation.
I'll just add to this. I'm on the board of. I keep forgetting it's being recorded, and I can't mention the organisation. There's an organisation that I work with that it's very difficult for that organisation, which does lots and lots of practical things around the country extremely well, to experiment with certain kinds of new techniques or ways of doing things. And when you really delve into why it is that they don't want to experiment, what it comes down to is a certain sort of attitude towards risk, which is about their personal reputation and the reputation of the organisation. And it prevents people from doing experiments. But you need to do experiments in order to see what works and what the public want and so on. So you need to find a way of overcoming your risk aversion in terms of reputation, and yet be able to do the experiment. For large organisations, that may mean that you get someone else to do it for you. You don't brand it for a while. For smaller organisations and larger ones, you might just label something to the public as an experiment. We're trying this, what do you think? And there are some organisations that just embrace that and they're absolutely happy with it. And then there's a whole lot, I'd say about 2/3 of the sector, that really, really don't want to just put stuff up as an experiment. And I don't know quite where that comes from. It might be about having the sort of artistic, it's got to be perfect kind of ideal. But that's a barrier that is holding back the sector.
Which leads neatly onto the last point, which is about being agile. It's about, there's a horrible expression about failing fast, which I think is completely wrong, because it's not about failing fast, it's about trying to learn fast and act quickly on what you've learned. So the ability to put things up and test them quickly. So various examples through this presentation, doing a paper sketch and showing it to someone, say, what do you think of this? It's one way of doing that. Being able to, building things quickly, moving on. But that doesn't mean having a complete lack of rigour in what you do. It's really important that you still structure your work. So when I worked with the IT department of the Houses of Parliament, they used agile software development as an excuse for being thoroughly and completely disorganised, and has since been disbanded and under new management. But so agility is not an excuse for completely messing things up. This is all well documented online. I'm allowed to say this. It's in the public domain. So yeah, being agile, being fast-footed, but being clear about why you're doing things, having those clear research goals, those clear experimental aims, saying we're doing this because we want to test this. We're not just doing it because we're just doing it for fun. We want to do this to see whether people are more likely to book a ticket or engage with us in some way.
Thanks to the internet cat people. I spend half my time in the science world and half my time in the arts world. And there's one big difference between the two. Neither is better than the other, but there's a difference in approach. That the arts world is driven by credit and authorship, and the science world is driven by credit and peer review. So in both cases people want credit, and there are stars in both of these. But if you go to science organisations like the Wellcome Trust, they, just even in the things that they do that are nothing to do with science, in their marketing, they do arts projects actually, they'll constantly peer review. They'll put up a straw man, they'll say, what do you think, what do you think? They'll put it out to 20 people, they'll get lots of feedback. And they'll just do that over and over again, that iteration, because that's the way that science works, that's the world they come from, right? And sometimes that's a good approach, and sometimes it's slow and you don't get the sort of purity of thought that you get from someone leading an arts organisation. It's a different thing. But if they curate something, they'll have tons of people crawling all over it, whereas when a big arts organisation curates something, you tend to have a lead curator, right? It's just a different approach, and I just recommend that the people from the arts world here sometimes just think of that peer review and that rigour that comes with peer review. It doesn't have to be a long process. You can just sort of stuff out by email. You can go into the next office and say, what do you think of this? I just recommend that as a reflex sometimes. That's the end of our presentation. Are there any questions?
The first thing is that we were so obsessed with setting up the breakout groups that we forgot to say thank you to Jackie for this talk. She didn't get a round of applause.
I sincere applause.